we talk in here a lot about sort of current events, what's going on, and sort of health and wellness. Obviously, we do a lot of talking with you about nutrition, as you're our resident nutrition expert and lifestyle coach here. We work with so many different types of people. And we oftentimes bring Ryan in to talk more on the, sort of the fitness end of things, just kind of spread things around a little bit. And obviously Cece is usually sitting over there in that other chair to be involved with these conversations. But, I don't know that a lot of people know kind of about what you do from a fitness perspective and, the lifestyle perspective, because we just never kind of really get into that. Yeah. We've told a few stories, and it's mostly, your stories are largely around coaching or your past in like the supplement sales or supplement game, which is something we've covered a lot on the show. But one of the things you do, and that I know a little bit about, I try to stay up on, but you're kind of like under the radar with it a little bit too, is the ultramarathoning that you do, or the ultra running. Let's call it ultra running, because marathon specific to like a distance, right? The ultra running can be any number of things. And I have experience in the endurance arena. I spent about 10 years like really focused there for a while. And so I think I can kind of relate.
Talked about that, yeah.
Yeah, I think I can kind of relate to it. But there's some interesting stuff there that I think could be valuable for people to maybe hear a little bit about your journey, but also just about the training, the nutrition, managing recovery, for those people that are maybe lean more on the endurance side of things, cyclists, runners, swimmers, trekkers, if you will. There's a large audience. I think we have a large audience that actually spends a lot more time there. They just kind of manage their strength training. They're 2-3 days. I'm just trying to maintain, stay healthy, keep my joints strong, all that stuff. And I see you having to do that too, because there's so much running in your life. So anyway, enough about me. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about ultra running.
Okay. Where should we begin?
Well, let's start with kind of how you got into it. Like what drove that? Because you've talked in the past about sort of your history. One of those things was you went through college as a baseball player, right?
Yes.
And so obviously not a lot of running there. There's some, but
as a pitcher, we actually did run quite a bit conditioning wise, but yeah, in terms of the actual gameplay, not a huge amount of running when I was in college.
So let's talk about what was the transition into the running, and then ultimately this shit you do where you run for hours and hours and hours and hours on end without stopping, because that's a whole different level of running.
Yeah. So I guess my journey to it was a little bit unorthodox in that I didn't really, aside from some kind of entry level track and field in literally middle school, I didn't do any type of track and field. I didn't do cross country. Frankly, I thought cross country and the people who did it were kind of dorky. And track and field was always in the spring. I was always playing baseball in the spring. Mm-hmm. And even if I wanted to do cross country, there was several years that I was playing football in the fall as well, during the cross country season. So that being said, I did always have somewhat of an inclination towards running. I was always considered an above average runner as a baseball player before I got to college, and I only pitched, and I, the whole cliche is that pitchers are not athletic. But prior to that, when I was playing outfield, when I was playing infield, hitting, base running, I was an above average outfielder or above average runner rather. And I also, always did pretty well, excelled in like running the mile in middle school and in high school. I clocked a couple sub 6 minute miles in just like high school PE, which unofficial, I suppose, because my teacher was probably hungover, but it's a track and you run 4 laps. So it was probably
How tough is that?
Yeah, it was probably pretty close to accurate. So I always had somewhat of an affinity for running. So I think that probably contributed to my decision to get into it a little bit more in depth. After my baseball career was over, my college eligibility was over, the professional ranks were not calling for me. I mean, I could have possibly pursued some type of independent league, but that's a really tough road, to plow. Yeah. You have a full-time baseball schedule 6 months out of the year where you're really not making very much money. And then you have to try to figure out, like, how do I actually survive as a human being in our society?
Choices.
The other 6 months of the year. So it's quite a long shot that you'll ever actually get to the point where you're making the big bucks when you're starting from an independent league. So I was sort of realistic in that, okay, this is probably the end of the line for me. And then I was exploring the film and entertainment industry for a few years. Right. That was actually my major. I always had interest in, I actually had half a mind to be a broadcaster. That was something that I was thinking about, and doing broadcast journalism. That didn't end up working out in terms of where I went to school, where I was going to have an opportunity to play baseball, where I wasn't going to have an opportunity. So I explored that field for about 5 years after college. And during that time, I didn't really have any type of competitive outlet for the first time in my life. I had been playing baseball from the time I was 4 years old, or baseball or football, some type of organized sport, for 17 consecutive years. And then I got to this point where I was now no longer competing.
I remember that for me. That was a rough place to be.
Yeah, you're a little bit, you kind of get the itch a little bit. And I was still training, I was still working out, mostly for aesthetics. It was, okay, yeah, I'm in good shape, I look good, but I'm getting kind of bored. I'm just kind of going through the motions here. So I don't know exactly if there wasn't maybe a single moment or anything like that where, well, first I'll say I did think about triathlon at one point in time, and I was starting to plan out how I would triathlon train, and realize, like, man, this is super time consuming.
And it's expensive.
And it is expensive. I didn't have the bike. I didn't have the wetsuit. There was a bunch of gear that I didn't have. And maybe that was kind of what led to it. It's like, well, I have shoes and I can run. So let me start with that and kind of see where that goes. And again, I always, running was always a pretty comfortable thing for me. So it was something that it was kind of easy for me to just kind of get into, as far as supplementing my resistance training with some runs. And then as I started to do it more and more, so I think my natural competitive spirit started to kick in. And I was like, okay, well, I was always a above average runner. Let me enter into a couple of local races. And that was kind of the beginning of it. Yeah.
So how does that start? So, because you can go anywhere, any city, during, basically the spring to the fall, you can find a 5K anywhere, a couple of them, like in any town or any city or whatever else. Is that where it started? Or were you looking for more like of the more popular, I guess, competitive type events?
So the first one I did was a 10K. Because I've never really believed in paying money to go run 3 miles. That's 20 minutes.
So that'll be $100, please.
Yeah, I'm like that's
you get a t-shirt and a bag.
That's a warm up. Yeah. So it was a 10K was the first one I did, and it was a little more on the end of like a 10K fun run, or kind of more of like a charity. I think it was based around like pedestrian safety.
Where was it? Where was this?
This was in LA.
I gotcha.
This was in LA, and I think it was started by some guy who had gotten hit by a car while he was cycling, and so that was kind of the basis of the event. And but I'm just entering this event because it was something that was close to me, and I just like to run. And it was one of those situations where I was probably taking it way more seriously than anybody else, and just boat raced everyone. and kind of realized after the fact, I was like, I don't think anybody's trying as hard as I am.
They're just out here to have a good time.
Yeah. So that
they just wanted to pay $100 for their workout today.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, I don't, I'm all for the cause. I experienced what it's like to be a pedestrian in LA and riding your bike in LA and fearing for your life constantly. But, I wasn't exactly super attached to the cause. So that was the first experience. And then once I came back to the Bay Area, that was when I wanted to get into it a little bit more, when I moved back to the Bay Area from LA. And I had run a Spartan event. So not the Spartan obstacle, the OCR races. They had just started the Spartan Trail series, where they were doing trail runs, no obstacles. So I entered in one of those that was somewhat local to here, east of San Jose, kind of out in the valley a little bit. And that was a 10K, and did pretty well, kind of got those competitive juices flowing, where it was a little more competitive. I finished pretty high. If there's a time, it's a race, and I'm trying to win. Like, I'm not, that's kind of my mentality about it.
I think that's what I was asking about. I think that's what I was alluding to, like the local 5K, 10K versus something that's maybe a little bit more competitive and has a little bit more juice behind it. Yeah. And that's actually a really good example of that. I think people can relate to that. Like, oh yeah. I know somebody that's done a Spartan race, and we've all done a 5K in town to support the local elementary school, or, again, a foundation or whatever that like you were talking about. But that's what I was talking about, because I remember there's a distinction between running that little, again, foundations 5K or 10K versus getting out there and running against what I think are people that think they're more competitive, and some are, some aren't. But like now, I want to do something a little bit more serious, get a little bit more sizzle to it.
Yeah, so that was the first step, and then the vid hit, and that basically canceled a whole year worth of races.
Yeah.
So that sort of postponed things. But then in 2021, when things were starting to pick up again, that was when I started to. Particularly the Spartan Trail events was kind of where I started, because they were pretty well put together events, and it was something that, I was kind of familiar with, at least. And then, from there it was like, okay, 10K became half marathon and a few half marathons. Now we start moving towards the first ultra, and there was some steps in between that. But my first ultra was a 50 kilometer, and that was in November of 2021.
So how long is 50K?
50K is 31 miles. So an ultra marathon is anything that is beyond a marathon, which is 26.2 miles. So anything beyond that gets grouped into the category of an ultra. So the shortest distance ultra is typically the 50 kilometer or 31 miles.
Let's talk about this. So, because that's a big jump to go from a half to an ultra.
Yeah, I have actually still to this day never run a road marathon because it's boring, in my opinion.
So I never did either. The furthest I got was doing the 10Ks and the Olympic distance triathlons. And then I transitioned at the time, was also doing some of the off-road stuff. Xterra, it was called the Xterra, was sponsored by Nissan, Nissan Xterra.
Xterra with an X, yeah.
Right, with the X. And these were the off-road triathlons. And they had varying different distances. There wasn't necessarily like an Olympic distance, which is the 10K run piece. So we could be running less, or it could be 5. It could be 6, it could be 7, depending on the terrain or whatever. And then the cycling events always were different too, depending on where you were. And the step up to doing an Ironman, I had zero interest in doing. Like I was like,
no thanks.
It's just boring. And plus, there was another piece to this too, is like I ended up being way more competitive off road because there's a little bit more skill, the power component, in terms of being able to deal with different terrains, and a skill component that was involved there put me in a better position to be a little bit more competitive versus getting out on the road with the fucking gazelles.
Yeah, with the greyhounds, yeah.
Dude. Yeah, so it's it's not that I went to win every time, but I wanted to be competitive. And I was just looking around just going, I'm not built for this. I just had to get that through my head. I could do it. That's a great thing this is the best part about running ultras, 5Ks, 10Ks, whatever, and triathlon is anybody can do it. But not everybody can be competitive.
Yeah.
But if you just want to get out and do something and be a part of something and have a goal to work towards or whatever, that was the best part about that. Is for me, one of the better parts about it is that anybody could enter and anybody could do it with minimal equipment. You didn't have to have the $15,000 bike, to go out and do a triathlon, right? You just had to have one.
Yeah.
Right. Cece, the first one Cece did, because Cece's done several Ironmans and half Ironmans. We still have that bike,
janky bike in the garage.
It's like a cruiser. Yeah. She did an Ironman on that fucking thing. Yeah, she's Callie rides it. I can't even remember what it is, but yeah, it's hanging in the garage right now, and I'm like, I don't know if I fucking did that. Yeah, everybody else is riding around on carbon fiber,
Tour de France looking things,
trialing bikes or whatever. Anyways. But that's a big step up to go to ultras is what I'm saying. And I wonder why, what drove that? I heard you say just a regular marathon on the road would be boring, but what's driving this? Because, and who, if anybody is influencing this for you?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I think the first time I ever heard of ultra running was when I was, I don't know, maybe in middle school, 13, 14 years old. And it was a guy named Dean Karnazes.
Dude's a savage.
Yeah, which he was kind of the first famous ultramarathoner.
Yeah. He
did the 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days kind of thing. And he's actually from Marin County, so just north of San Francisco. There was a long-standing, or one of the longest standing ultra running communities is here in the Bay Area. So he was probably the first guy who became famous enough that I remember reading about him in ESPN the magazine, back when magazines were still a thing. And
he was on the cover.
Yeah, and I had an ESPN the magazine subscription, and I was reading about this guy that would run 200-mile races or 100-mile races. He's running through the entire night. He's smashing a whole pizza while he's running on the side of the road.
Falling into a ditch.
Yeah, he's
passing out.
Yeah, he's doing these incredible things. And that was the first time I was like, at that age, I'm used to running 1 mile in PE. And I'm like, it's possible for a person to cover 100 miles on their feet. So that was probably the first I heard about it. And then in that first 10K Spartan Trail, I actually met him. Goofy guy.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I actually met him. So that was kind of, I think maybe that made it a little more real for me because he was like an ambassador of that event. And I ended up placing in my age group. I think I finished 3rd in my age group in that event. And like he put the medal on me and I was like, holy shit, this is the guy that I was reading about in a magazine when I was in middle school.
That's cool.
And that's also cool. A Cal Poly guy.
I do remember that.
Also a Cal Poly guy. I'm a UCSB guy. So we had a little conversation about the, green and blue rivalry. But yeah, he was probably the first one that kind of influenced me. And then as far as, getting to that point where I wanted to do it, I think it was just a matter of just wanting to go farther. I think that was just kind of how I saw it in my mind was just, let me just go a little further. Let me go a little further. Let me go a little further. And we can, there's a lot of parallels between ultra running and life that we can get into. But yeah, that first 50K happened. I did pretty well. I remember I sat down afterwards and I was unable to stand for a good while afterwards, but that was kind of the impetus of it. And then, yeah, I think natural competitive side of me was just like, okay, well, just doing it is not enough for me. Now I want to compete. And I did okay in that one. I still placed fairly high. So I think maybe that was part of it too, is thinking, okay, maybe I have a little bit of a potential in this. Like,
you put some work in here.
Like I could actually compete in this. And maybe that was encouraging for me.
What's the difference between just doing it and placing fairly well and competing to win one of these things?
So it's going to be, I would say, your preparation, which, that sounds cheesy, that sounds cliche, but your preparation, your pacing. I mean, at that time, I was still, I was kind of hack in how I was going about my training. And I think that first 50K was, I got through that with grit and moxie or, whatever. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of will to get through it. But as you progress, now you have a little, at least now I have a little better understanding of, okay, how am I pacing this? How am I going to run my own race? How am I going to, manage the terrain, actually keep those things in mind, manage my fueling, just more of kind of like the little details that over the course of 30 plus miles can make 20 minutes of difference, which could be the difference between, placing high or, being whatever.
And therein lies the parallels in life. Yeah. Right there with what you just said, managing the details, doing the little things, taking a step back. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Just managing the details in general. Yeah. I mean, I guess probably maybe the biggest thing I would say in ultra running is managing your pace, and having the discipline and the patience to manage your pace, especially someone like myself who was, coming from shorter distances where it's not a sprint, but you're certainly not as concerned with bonking, with peaking too early because the race just isn't that long. So how do I kind of, how do I increase the timeline in that, I'm 15 miles deep and I'm only halfway. Mm-hmm. So you obviously you have to manage your exertion in a different way. And also being somebody who's competitive, a mantra that I repeat to myself is run your own race, run your own race, run your own race, because you could be, 20 miles in and somebody passes you and you're like, oh, fuck that. I'm not letting this person pass me. And then you overexert yourself over positioning and then you die in the last, 3 miles. So you get, that's something that I've had to work on, is being okay getting past and kind of understanding that there's some give and take where I don't always have to sustain a lead on someone. It's okay. I can let them pass because I may catch them later.
I was just going to say that just because they're passing you doesn't mean they're going to be able to maintain the pace that they're running, run your own race, and that person could be overexerting themselves.
Exactly.
Thinking that they need to pass you, and then it ends up biting them in the butt in the end, and you just keep you keep going and go right on past them.
You're in the top 5 in the first half of the race. You think you're hot shit, and you end up in 15th because you tail off at the end.
2 big words come up for me in this, or concepts that have words, because words are things.
Words with concepts containing letters.
One of those is consistency, but I think the bigger one in this is awareness. Like just your awareness of like, what is the appropriate pace for me based on time, terrain, and all kinds of variables or factors that may be existing here. Like, maybe it's the heat, it's the weather, maybe it's the rain, maybe it's the dark, because not all these things are,
sometimes you're in the dark.
If you're out there for 10 hours, that thing might start in the dark or end in the dark, kind of thing.
I've done both, yeah.
What's the longest one you've ever done? Like in terms of timing?
In terms of timing, a little over 13 hours.
Jesus. Okay. So again, like sun comes up, sun rises and sets inside that amount of time.
Yeah. That one was in November. So started in the dark, finished in the dark.
Right. So these are all things like from an awareness perspective that you can only gain that awareness by actually going through there. Yeah. And if you don't have an awareness of what your basic pace needs to be, right, and you're juggling that maybe in your head and on your wristwatch or all the things that you're trying to monitor, and the dark comes up and you don't know how to navigate that way, or your light goes out. I think there's been some things
that happened to me,
that have come up. Like then that thing that you need to be consistent with, it's arguably one of the most important things, so that you don't bonk.
Your pacing,
it can get lost. Again, just going back to the parallels in life and in this type of an event. That's one of the things I really enjoyed about triathlon as well, is having to manage different things, know where your strengths and your weaknesses are, but also being able to recognize where other people's strengths and weaknesses are, and studying that and learning from that, whether that's pre-race, post-race, or peri, during. So just going back, like the difference between doing really well or better for you, because it sounds like you're doing pretty well, is understanding all these little details. And again, that consistency and understanding what that means for you. And the biggest challenge you said being understanding what your pace should be. Yeah. But that comes from a high level of awareness, which can only really come through
training,
doing it.
Through your training and through racing, through failing, through experiencing, what it's like to, maybe get out to a little too hot of a start and then be dragging to finish. All those types of things, come with more practice. And then as you increase the distance, like how I'm going to pace a 50K is different than how I'm going to pace a 100K, is different from how I'm going to pace my first 100 mile that I'm, planning to do. Mm-hmm. So, that the timeline, I think, is a big part of it. And that, especially in ultra running, the patience, that's been a difficult thing for me. I know you guys, we did it. I wasn't on that one, but you guys did the cardio episode and talking about like
zone 1, zone 2,
comfortable in zone 2. That is something I still struggle with to this day. The fucking shuffle is still very challenging. It
doesn't feel like running.
Yeah, right? It still feels very challenging for me to the point where I'm like, I should just walk. Like this is actually more uncomfortable than walking, and it's more uncomfortable than running faster. This shuffle thing. But that's your home base when you're in an ultra, is that zone 2, 60%, 60 to 70% max of your heart rate, and hanging out there for mile after mile after mile, and having the patience to do that, because you're still going to need something in reserve for, when you're at mile 50, you'll be happy that you were in zone 2 versus you were in zone 3 too early, or too much, too often.
And for too long, if you happen to get there because you're going uphill and, it's necessary. But one of the things, other things that comes up for me here is how, because of your skill level and how good you are with the nutrition and lifestyle coaching, when I listen to you talk about this, it makes sense, like how you apply the lessons that you've learned, not directly, but indirectly from the running and the ultra running and your experience to this. To the nutrition coaching when I say this, and to the client who doesn't understand any of this, who has very little awareness. They don't need to understand ultra running, but you're going to need to get them to understand patience, consistency.
And I'm comfortable in zone 2.
Pacing, right? Not coming out of the gate too hot. The dangers of doing that. The dangers, when I say that, like the pitfalls of doing that. Also the pitfalls of, I guess, comparing yourself to somebody else, you know, or what somebody else has been able to accomplish.
How much they're progressing and how fast they're progressing. So, I mean, that perfect case in point was this most recent 100K that I did. I was probably 10th place, somewhere around there. And we were, I think, miles 23 to 26, somewhere in there. And the 100 kilometer is 62 miles. So we were a little over a third of the way there. And I'm coming down this very long descent that ended in an aid station at the bottom of a very long, very arduous climb. And I see this guy, he's already coming back up. He's already been to the aid station. He's already coming back. He's way ahead of me. He's probably 20 minutes ahead of me. And I think probably about third place at that time.
That could be a mindfuck.
Yeah. And I remember seeing him and I'm like, well, I'm not catching that guy. That guy's way ahead of me. Later on in the race, we're about 52 miles in, like one of the final aid stations. He's
in a fetal position,
done at the aid station. I'm like, I haven't seen this guy in 4 hours. And now he's got his friends or his family coaching him up for him to just finish. This guy was in third place. He was, way ahead of me. So it's, you could see that and be like, oh, I'm so far behind. I'm never going to catch this person. He got out to a little too fast of a start and he's bonking, before the race is over with 10 miles to go. He's struggling to even finish now. So that's, you got to play the long game.
Yeah, you're already taxing yourself. Like, coming off of one of these things, this is not something you do once a weekend, every weekend, right? Like there's time to recover. You have to come off of, or get it deep into the recovery process in order to come back stronger and be able to continue to train at the level to do the next one. But I think about that, like specific to all the work that you're putting in to get through and just finish and do well. And there's got to be a planned recovery period. What does that do to your psyche? What does that do to your training plan, long and short term, when you go out too fast or at some point think you're not doing enough and you grab for some gear that doesn't exist, or you're trying to find something in the margin that's going to, get you to the finish line. And then you wind up like, in a fetal position at the aid station, shaking and, cramping and, passing out or whatever. What's the recovery on that look like, both mentally and physically? It's, and even if you got yourself up to kind of push through the finish line, what kind of, the word I'm going to use is damage, but how big of a setback have you just given yourself by not staying consistent? Has that ever happened to you?
As far as like a straight bonk?
Just bonking and just like hitting the wall.
No, I wouldn't say completely. I mean, there's definitely been in that race that I'm talking about. I petered out at the end, maybe a little bit more than I had wanted to. I had a little bit less left at the end. Yeah. There was a little more race than I had energy left. So I've never completely like shut down. I've never had that happen to me. I mean, it's death before DNF. So that's kind of, it's never come up for me, but yeah, I mean, I could see how that could be very mentally taxing for somebody if they, they got 10 miles to go and your mind and body is like, I cannot finish. Like, I can't do this.
Well, let me share a little story with you. So, we talked about the triathlon. I was doing some adventure racing, think triathlon, but now I add kayaks, rappelling, some trekking,
an adventure,
mountain biking in the dark, running in the dark, going for 24, 36 hours of this stuff. And, man, we had plenty of trials and tribulations, just kind of in a learning process, but going back to pacing and getting yourself in trouble. I was actually here, but I was living in Southern California, but I came up here to this race. It was up in Half Moon Bay. And one of the cycling sections, I was borrowing a bike from somebody because I didn't have an appropriate mountain bike for racing. Like what I had was a big, heavy downhill, type deal. And tons of travel, not appropriate for the type of racing we're talking about. So I borrowed this bike. This guy was super generous in letting me borrow it. I'd trained on a little bit, came out racing. And by the way, I was racing with a partner, so it was a 2-man team. We were in the front, and we were in the front by a large margin, and we were feeling really strong and doing really well. So we're coming down the trail, and all of a sudden, basically the cranks lock up on me. It doesn't want to go around in a circle. Right? So I'm like, what the hell? And it turns out one of the chainring bolts had had come out and wiggled its way out and it locked everything up. So to flip the bike over, now you're using your very basic tool. You're not carrying a lot of, tools to fix your bike, very basic tool to try to get this thing back together. And now you got people passing you.
Yeah. Now you start panicking. You see people passing you.
Oh, not just panicking. I'm pissed. Like, I'm so mad.
Yeah. I've lost my positioning. Yeah.
It's a mechanical failure, right? So we put it together. And anyway, so now we have to get back into the race. And so now we start pushing beyond our pace.
Catch up. Yeah.
So by the time we got to the final
now
run.
You're running their race, not your race.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And what that resulted in for me is when we got into that final run where we had to go out, past the harbor, actually, for people that know Half Moon Bay, we had to go out to where there's I think it's a light tower or it's a water tower. I don't know. Maybe it's a fucking nuclear power plant. I don't know. It's up there on a hill. So we had to finish on the uphill. Man, we had just left the harbor and my legs started cramping up. And when I say cramping up, I mean locking up.
Yeah, like you're hitting the deck.
Quad lock, and I'm laying there now. Now I have to lay down and help, and hamstring lock. And this guy's my partner's trying to help me get through this just to finish the thing. Yeah. It was so disappointing, and it was all because a monkey wrench got thrown into the thing.
Yeah,
and we had to overcompensate, and that really messed me up. And I got to tell you, like, I was messed up for days, weeks, physically, but also mentally on this because I had,
if it wasn't for that mechanical failure,
what would have happened? I
would have finished so much higher. Yeah, I would have gotten all the glory.
It's not like I'm racing for $100,000 prize purse. I was going to get a T-shirt, a medal, and
but maybe it would have been a gold medal. Yeah,
a free helmet or something that the sponsor donated. I don't know, but I say that to say just with the experience of hitting the wall. And then being able to recover from that during that race was like, it just wasn't going to happen. So what can you do to set yourself up to not do that? You've already mentioned pacing. I use the term awareness and, in terms of awareness and consistency. I wonder, how do you feel for this stuff? So like, you can't go out for 13 hours and not eat. You would bonk. So how do you feel? I've done it for days, but not at the intensity level or the consistency level. There were aid stations that we could stop and transition and spend some time at. And rowing a kayak is different than running for 100 miles. Yeah. So how do you do that? How do you manage it?
Well, I would say, number one, I've never done anything that was unaided. So the races I've done, there are aid stations. Some races, they're a little more plentiful than other races. Some races are a little more well aided than other races, but generally speaking, kind of what I've tried to adapt, and this is definitely a work in progress, is trying to eat up, at least like 3 days in advance. And when I say eat up, for me, that more or less means eat as much as possible.
Do you calculate this? Is it like 10% more, 20% more, 25% more calories?
It ends up being probably about 20% more.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Well,
that would probably be about what I'm aiming for. If a typical caloric intake for me is around, 3,000 calories is probably a good place for me to be most of the time. I'm trying to maybe get to 3,500. And a lot of that's not necessarily more volume of protein. That could be adding in calorically dense things like oils, like butter, like nuts, like things that are fairly high in fat, and certainly not shying away from carbohydrates at all. Definitely getting some additional carbohydrates in. So I am trying to glycogen load to some degree. And then as far as on race day, most of the time, the race, if it's an ultra, starts too early for me to actually have like a full meal beforehand. Yeah. And that I don't like that. I don't like running with a full stomach. So my goal is to try to eat until stuffed the night before, try to have as large of a dinner basically as I possibly can. And then as far as during the race, that's going to be a combination of, I would say electrolytes and carbs are going to be those are the top two things on my mind. And if I'm taking some protein at the same time in the form of, different meal bars, there's the gels, there's obviously electrolytes. And then at the aid station, it may be, a little bit of fruit, a little bit of trail mix. The only time I ever drink soda is during an ultramarathon.
Why?
Because that shit is rocket fuel when you are at that point where your glycogen levels are completely exhausted or you're getting close to exhausted, and you get that basically like instant sugar, that instant glucose, that like you feel it. I feel that. I mean, I had in this last one probably the most satisfying cup of Mountain Dew I have ever had in my life, because it was the weather was hot. This Mountain Dew was damn cold. It was that hit my lips like salvation. So that something like that is something I'm only going to do in an ultra, because at that point in time, like, I'm not concerned in any shape or form about the sugar I'm onboarding. I'm looking for that.
What about hydration during or before, during, and during?
Again, trying to hydrate up or drink up prior, kind of saturate to a degree. I know that there are methods as far as this is kind of the refining process that I'm getting into at this point, where I'm actually keeping numbers in mind in terms of caloric intake per hour, in terms of fluid intake per hour, actually having specific quantities that I am at least have in mind. So for liquid or fluid rather, that's between like 8 and 32 ounces, usually per 15 minutes. The 32 is probably going to be too high. But that like 8 ounces per 15 minutes, now maybe 32 ounces per hour, that may be more appropriate, but it may be more than that depending on how hot it is. So,
how are you managing that? Obviously it's on board.
Yeah. As far as like, how am I carrying it? I mean, I carry a hydration pack, a hydration vest. I mean, that's something I'm also kind of playing with as far as my gear. I do more or less like the bladder on my back with the tube thing. I may be transitioning or adding soft flasks. So the bottles that you carry on the front, that can be helpful in that the fluid doesn't get as hot as it does when it's sitting on your back. And sometimes you don't really want this hot electrolyte fluid and carbs going into your mouth. It's not refreshing at all.
If you want gut distress, like just put hot liquid in your gut on a hot day when your GI system is already starting to shut down.
Yeah. So there's definitely, that's something you have to manage as well, in terms of I'm hesitant usually to try new things during a race in terms of like a carbohydrate drink or gels, something like that. Cause too much of that, you will get disaster pants, bio break. So that's something I'm keeping in mind as well. And there's been some trial and error there as well. There's been some misfires there in terms of that's not the mix I'm looking for. I need to pull off here, but drinking before you're thirsty, I guess, would be one thing to keep in mind. If you're
that's
already,
a good rule of thumb,
if you're already thirsty, you're probably too late. So just you mentioned awareness, just being on top of it, being more mindful of it.
It's like being hungry when, during the day, like if you can eat before you're hungry, then you're never going to be hungry.
Yeah. Then you never get to that point where you're starving. So it's definitely something to keep in mind, especially over, the 100K, 100 mile, that everything kind of amplifies in terms of how well you need to plan it, how mindful of your pacing you need to be, how aware of the course you need to be, because it can be very easy to just kind of, you look at a course map, but you don't really look at it very closely. You don't really look at the elevation profile. You're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go up, I'm going to go down, but you're not really maybe looking at, okay, specifically at mile 18, there's a big ass climb followed by this, more of that becomes more important the longer the race becomes. That makes sense.
I mean, to not pay attention to that, like those details, seems irresponsible to me. Yeah. Like if you plan on
competing
and doing well at all, and maybe even enjoying yourself, right? Because it's the quickest way to going with an unrealistic expectation or just ignorance doesn't seem, super smart to me. Again, we keep making these parallels to life, right? And having an unrealistic expectation because you haven't looked down the road. Like what could possibly happen?
You need to have some foresight. Yeah.
You need to have some foresight. So go back to like nutrition coaching and planning. Like there has to be a plan here. We have to get into this. We have to understand, and we have to understand where are our challenges going to be. So let's revisit maybe where they've been in the past and what we can maybe foresee kind of coming forward. And you like you mentioned the hill, the very steep climb. that steep climb not only lasts 5 minutes, but the impact of that 5 minutes could have long-lasting implications obviously in the race. And again, going back to coaching in life, like how do we deal with that, and what can we do ahead of time to prepare for that? And also, I would say, like, what are the things that you learn through doing that prepare you for, you know, these races where something does come up and catch you by surprise? I mean, does that ever happen? Like, well, I mean, what are some of the bigger surprises? We mentioned the light thing. That had to be pretty annoying.
Yeah, that was something that caught me by surprise. I mean, to bring it back to, you mentioned, you know, that climb is only 5 minutes, but it could have much more lasting impacts than that. I call that mitigating damage. Like, how much damage am I taking in terms of, for me, that's actually usually more so on downhills. If you're really bombing a downhill,
I'll tear you up.
And you're just taking a ton of impact on your ankles and your knees, you may be moving fast through that stretch, but now you've taken all this damage. And depending on how much further along, you know, how much further you have to go, you may end up regretting that you wanted to be a hot shot and bomb down that hill. And now you just took all this impact. So
like reducing your calories and increasing your expenditure, you know, and crash dieting. And
maybe I lost some weight fast, but
now I'm in the hole.
But now I'm paying for it plus interest on
metabolic
the back,
adaptation
on the backside. So, I mean, that's one thing. Yeah. Managing, I mean, that goes back to managing your pace and managing your levels of effort and understanding that it's a long game, and having that kind of, you know, that periodization in place, just like you would periodize your training program, just like you would periodize your nutrition program. You know, the cut right before the vacation or whatever, maybe that's my kick. I'm saving that for when the time is right, and then we rock and roll, and I move into that at the appropriate time. Remind me, what was the question outside of?
No, you're hitting it. Was there a thing, anything that kind of hit you or caught you off guard? And I mentioned the light thing or the headlamp thing where I think batteries were dead or something.
Yeah, that was, I thought my headlamp was fully charged, and apparently it wasn't. And this is a headlamp that I'd used before that had never caused me any issues before. And the race started, I think, at 5 a.m, and this was in November. So the sun didn't come up until like 6:30 or almost 7 o'clock. And the light worked just fine for, I don't know how long, 5 to 10 miles, somewhere in there. And then I'm out in the Marin Headlands where there is zero light, no houses, no street lights. It is pitch black out there, and my headlight goes out, headlight, whatever. And then I have to, you know, find some guy like, hey, dude, can I use your light until like the sun comes up? And that obviously, you know, interfered with my pace. We did end up taking a little bit of a wrong turn at one point in time. So that cost me time because I went, you know, however far off course into the fucking bushes and realizing like, wait a second, like we're using one light for 2 people, like looking for the flag, like that kind of thing. So that was probably the biggest one. There was one time this was only a half marathon where we talk about bio breaks where, I think I had my pre-race mixture hit my
digestive. Was a little rich?
Yeah, hit my digestive system in a little bit of of an unexpected manner. And I'm only about 7.5, 8 miles into a 13-mile race, and I'm pinching. And that was, you know, again, I was probably top 3, I think. So in my mind, I'm like, if I have to pull off here, like I'm losing my positioning. So it's a matter of, is my positioning important enough to shit myself? And even if I do go in the, you know, off and have to handle my business, I'm not carrying any toilet paper. So am I going to lose some underwear in this process here? And then I have to finish the race with no underwear. So, you know, to give everybody the graphic details.
No, I think I love it because this is a very real thing. I've been there myself, and I've seen in races people running at the end. I've even seen people on the bike where they've got themselves, their insides on their outsides.
Yeah. They got doo-doo out there.
Yeah. It's part of the thing.
Yeah. So those would probably be the 2 biggest, I guess things that kind of caught me off guard kind of thing. And aside from that, maybe just, even if you're trying to look at the course map with kind of a discerning eye, still not knowing every turn, every climb.
Just like life.
Yeah, you didn't document everything. So speaking of life, I think that's the biggest thing that I see, or the biggest parallel that I see in an ultramarathon versus life, is that there are seasons of an ultramarathon and there are seasons of life. There are times, if you're, in a 62-mile race, where you're feeling good, you're enthusiastic, you're on top of the world, the scenery's great, I'm so excited I'm doing this, I'm having such a good time, man, I feel so good about myself. And then there are times when you're like, fuck this, this hurts, I want to quit, I don't want to do this anymore, right. Is it really worth finishing? And that type of thing comes up in life all the time. There are times when you're flying high, you're feeling enthusiastic, everything's clicking, you feel good. And there are times when it's an absolute slog. And that, managing yourself through those times. So not allowing your enthusiasm, not getting carried away with your enthusiasm, that you end up overexerting yourself. Well, because I feel good here, I'm going to go a little faster. I'm going to push a little harder because I feel good right now. And I'll handle the rest later. I'll handle that later. And also on the flip side, when you're in the slog, not quitting when you want to quit, when it's not fun anymore, when you're not motivated. You're not motivated. You're questioning why you even did this in the first place. And you want nothing more than to be finished. So I even as somebody who I think I'm maybe somewhat of a masochist in that I enjoy the pain. There are definitely times in races where I'm like, dude, I want to be done. I do not want to do this anymore. Like, I want to be finished. I want nothing more than the finish line. I'm not having fun anymore. But at that point, it almost becomes a matter of duty to finish.
The commitment.
Yeah.
Which is, the commitment and the consistency are generally the two most important things.
And knowing how, and knowing that it's death before DNF.
Yeah.
Like I won't.
You've made up your mind.
I will not fold under any circumstance. I mean, if my leg is broken in half and I physically have to crawl 15 miles, then maybe I might call it. But that's the mindset that I have, that under no circumstance will I quit.
That's the will.
How much it hurts.
That's the will and the decision, the commitment that you made to yourself, because nobody at the fucking race cares.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody cares if you quit. You're the only, that has to be internal.
Yeah. This last race I did, I think there was over 200 entrants and 80 people didn't finish.
Yeah. You're not important. You're not that important, dude. What is this? Any importance or any level of importance that's been placed on it is you've done that to yourself or for yourself. So how committed are you to that, to the level of that, whatever that happens, whatever the thing happens to be. And again, I keep bringing this up, like the parallels to life, the parallels to the nutrition coaching and playing the long game, because there's just not a lot of immediate gratification that comes with that. There's high points and low points, but you don't get a result right now. The result is 100 miles down the road, man.
Yeah.
So we will see what it looks like when we get there, but we have work to do. So let's keep that vision, that light is there for me to run to, literally.
But we're taking it one step at a time, 1 mile at a time.
So in that, here comes the question. You mentioned the Coke being the jet fuel.
Yeah.
And so there's times in there that's a substance, and it makes perfect physiological sense why you feel the way you feel, and it provides the result that you get from it. But are there any hacks that you've come up with? And because you used that word earlier, just kind of hacking your way through your running to get done. But are there any hacks that you found to overcome these things, or get you through these tough moments, or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when I was describing myself as being a hack.
Totally, yeah. That's what I was referring to.
But I know hacks. People are the secret.
What's the secret? Yeah. What's the workaround? What's is there a supplement? Is there a piece of gear? Is there I don't know, some song that provides some magic that you can play in your headphones or whatever while you're out there?
Well, yeah, the first thing I'll say is that gear, I don't have any fancy gear. I'm not a fancy gear guy. There's probably fancier gear that I would like to have that is just not at the top of the priority list right now. So it's definitely not gear. I mean, you want to be comfortable. You don't want to wear something for the first time on race day. So I do have certain things that, I make sure that I've trained, in them before, and I'm comfortable in them as far as gear goes. As far as supplements, I mean, carbohydrate supplements, there are certain herbs or medicinal mushrooms that may increase your endurance a little bit, but I've actually devalued that a little bit more as time has gone on. I mean, I do use a pre-workout formulation that is geared more towards endurance sports. So it's geared more towards focus, towards VO2. It's not as much about, power output or pumps, things, although the blood flow matters in running as well. The nitric oxide production matters in running as well. So, I do use a pre-workout that is, formulated for endurance work. There are, something called a cordyceps mushroom is something that I've used in the past. I've used things to, certain herbs that may increase lung capacity. But again, I've actually moved away from that recently because I'm like, how much of a difference is this actually making? And was I just trying to slap Band-Aids on the fact that I hadn't trained properly?
Boom.
Was I trying to overcome a lack of training by inserting the supplement that will, give me the superpower? So now it's more about, the hack is train. That's the hack is, get out there and get reps and build that base. And the training is, both, time on your feet, training for speed, training for just your ability to run for a long ass period of time or just be on your feet for a long period of time. And then there's the strength training side of things as well, which I feel like that is something that I have been more regimented about. I've been more regimented in general, but the strength training side has helped me recover faster. I think it's helped me weather the training more effectively. I don't think it's necessarily has increased my top speed, but I'm not really in a top speed game. So
smart.
I could probably run 1 mile faster when I was 20 than I could now, but I certainly would never even survive running 60 miles when I was 20. And now I can do that and recover in 72 hours. And I think that is a testament to the stability, the coordination, the balance, that I've built through strength training.
Yeah, the core stuff that comes along with that most people won't credit for. Like, it's like, give me the gains and give me the abs, or the aesthetic result.
Yeah, they're like, do I go out and I barbell bench press? Yeah, I do, but
do you need to have a 400-pound barbell bench press?
I don't.
No,
and I don't.
Like, why would you?
Yeah,
like
that's not my game.
Yeah, it's not your game. But at the same time, it's like, who needs that?
Yeah,
maybe somebody does. If you're competing solely for the purpose of bench pressing, maybe you do. The point of this is it's the application of the training. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that I think has been a big piece for me. And I mean, mindset wise, I think that's probably the biggest part that, you go on all kinds of like mental journeys, when you're out on these training runs. It can be a very solitary sport where you're spending a lot of time in your own head and a lot of time with your own thoughts. And there are, you could convince yourself one way or another in those times when you are there with nothing but your own thoughts. And I feel like I think of all the good stuff when the mic isn't on, as far as like these profound things to say. But as far as
I'm not looking for that from you, but I hear you.
But yeah, I mean, it's being relentless, I guess, is that's how I think of it. And I guess maybe this is one thing that I've thought about in the past. Whereas some, like in a sport like football, I'm going to go out and tear someone's head off. I'm playing angry. I'm playing explosively. That's not going to be the mindset to have in an ultramarathon. It's more about I'm unbreakable. Like nothing is going to break me under any circumstance. I just will not fold. That's kind of what I think about is it's about being able to endure, to be resilient, to keep going no matter what, even if that is the shuffle, even if that's all that you have, is just maintaining that little shuffle. Because again, in life, you're not always going to have the chutzpah to be sprinting in stride. There's going to be times when it's going to feel like more like a crawl, but
it's going to suck.
But we never go backwards. That's the thing. Like I'm not going backwards. I'm going to take any incremental step that I can take, relentlessly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
As a good place to transition. And what's the reality of that with regard to your life, right? And being relentless in pursuit of your training and to be unbreakable, you know, on the trail. And, you know, when you're out there doing that, just, I mean, with regard to like time commitments, relationships, balance of work, life, you know, all that stuff. I mean, this is not something that you can go to the gym and do in an hour or 90 minutes or something like that. Right. So, and that was one of the real challenges for me in the triathlon and the adventure racing was, you know, the 3 to 4 hours a day of training that I was doing most days during the week, and sometimes longer depending on what the workout called for that day. There was a real challenge there. It can, and I'll just start by saying this: it can be really lonely out there. You know, when you're out there by yourself, which is actually how I ended up meeting Cece. Like I begged this cycling group that I saw her riding in, the guy that kind of headed it up. I'm like, please invite me for a fucking bike ride, dude. I cannot do another 100 miler by myself. Like I need somebody to talk to, God damn it.
I need some company.
I begged him. That's how I'm
kind of getting to that point too, where I've never been in like a run club or anything like that, but I've started to try to kind of affiliate myself with one just because it helps pass the time.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think I've intentionally designed my life where like my career and my life are kind of the same thing. Like my lifestyle is my career and vice versa, in that, you know, I'm perfectly okay showing up, talking about diet and exercise all day, exercising myself, and then going home and focusing on my own diet. Like those things are, I've integrated those two things where this is just, it's my lifestyle and it's what I do for work. And I've been intentional about that. So it's not, the training is not taking me away from too much else that I would be doing.
Nice.
Yeah. So there's, you know, obviously there's, you know, work obligations, life obligations. And there are times when, you know, I may have to kind of cram things in. And there are times where am I training, you know, is my training volume quite where it should be? Probably not, if, you know, you want to really get to like the elite level. But those elite level individuals, they're professionals. It is their job. They do have all day to train. So that's kind of the next, you know, the next step. If you can kind of get to the doorstep of that, and then now maybe we have to, you know, make some harder decisions in terms of how far do I really want to take this. I can definitely say that, the amount I train now, you know, I'm not getting to that professional elite level at the amount of training I currently do. It's just not going to happen. But at the same time, it's not that hard for me to prioritize it. I guess, you know, maybe that's not, you know, the most encouraging thing to say for people who do have a hard time prioritizing it. But for me, it's my life. It's my lifestyle.
You made the commitment to this. Right? So,
and I find it fun, and I find it, it doesn't interfere or impede with my life outside of ultra running. I think it improves it. I think my training time is a time when I get it's when I gather a lot of my thoughts together. That's when I kind of blow off some steam, or if I'm feeling upset about something, that's kind of when I sort it out. And you know, if you have to take out some aggression, like the mountain doesn't care.
Doesn't kick back.
Yeah. The mountain doesn't care who you are. It was there before you were here, and it'll be there after you're gone.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people can relate to that, man. I mean, when they hear them talking about working out as therapy or their training time as therapy, I don't like looking at it that way, but at the same time, it is a time to be reflective and, you know, shake out the things. Shake out the demons a little bit. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of, having to sacrifice, I'm at a point in my life where, you know, I don't have children. I think that would be, you know, that would change things quite a bit. I mean, I do have a girlfriend, and, you know, there are times when I do have to, okay, how do I make sure that I'm tending to my relationship and not be the guy who always needs to be working out because my workouts are the most important thing. When at the end of the day, ultra running is a hobby. I'm not being paid. I consider myself a competitive amateur, but I'm still an amateur. So there are times when it's like, okay, it's not the highest priority. So does that answer the question totally,
in terms of,
Yeah, totally, man. Because that's been my whole life too. You know, working in the fitness industry and trying to be competitive at times with different things as a hobby or as an amateur. Just trying to decide, like, could I be better at this if I put in a little bit more time, worked a little less, spent a little less time around the family.
But is that worth it?
Didn't take that vacation, if I don't do this social thing, if I don't see my families on the holidays, you know, that you know, travel and stuff like that. Yeah. Is it worth it? Is that really what I want?
How much do you want it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I knew where my commitment level was, and I have no regrets, on any of that.
No
stuff.
regrets. Yeah.
I got a ton of value out of it. And, that said, I appreciate you kind of sharing that, because I think that's things that people struggle with. Like, I really want to do these other things, but it takes, it means a total lifestyle change. Maybe not, maybe it just means I have to make some adjustments here, but if I can make it part of my lifestyle and not change my lifestyle as a result, you're probably going to have way more success there. And if you have people in your life, like a girlfriend, a wife, a husband, kids or whatever else, and you include them in that process, I bet more times than not, that kind of works out favorably, right? Where, they understand and it's clearly communicated, and this is what dad does, or this is what mom does. And you'd be surprised, as that's how I've lived most of all of my adult life with kids, for that matter, just in being active. And so each of us kind of had our own different things to do, including my kids, doing soccer. Like, okay, well, this is the time commitment we have to give to that. So it's a give and take. That means my ride or my run has to get done at 5 a.m. today. Yeah. So they can be on the soccer field at 8 a.m., kind of thing. I think that's all really good advice, because I think people struggle with that balance. And that's one of the things that, you handle predominantly with nutrition clients on a regular basis, and also with personal training clients as well, because you're out there on the floor, a lot. But, when we talk about the nutrition thing, I think, and coaching thing, when I say thing, I don't mean that to minimize it, just that it is very different than personal training. A lot of people try to relate the two or bring the two together.
Nutrition, coaching, and personal training.
It's not the same. We treat it very differently here, because we understand there's a lot that goes into both of those things, and having a nutrition conversation that can be very meaningful, direct, and action oriented during a personal training session is not something that I've seen people have a lot of success with. Yeah. And vice versa, like having this nutrition conversation on the side of what's going on with regard to the physical, training piece of it, or again, vice versa, we're having this nutrition conversation. We're only just kind of tiptoeing around the fitness part I don't think sets people up for a lot of success. So we have a very clear line of, like, this is nutrition coaching, this is personal training, or, fitness coaching, and this is how we handle it. And so I see you doing that, with so many people. And again, going back to predominantly is getting them to prioritize their time, make a certain level of commitment, understand what that commitment is based on their current, present, and past, or their past, current, and future. How do we balance this stuff? And what is our plan? What is our long-term vision here? Okay, that's the vision. How do we set ourselves up for success? Yeah. What are the pieces? Okay, and within the pieces, what are those little milestones that we know we have to meet? How do we prepare ourselves from a mindset perspective in order to get to these things, knowing that some of these milestones are going to be a little tough or maybe a little bit more challenging? And then what happens when we run into an issue?
Contingency plan.
What's the backup plan? What's the contingency plan, or what's the workaround here? Or, and then what level of support do I need to get or ask for in order to get through these things? I mean, that's life. And so a lot of the nutrition coaching that you do is life coaching.
Yeah. It's definitely different than personal training, and personal training is a much more controlled environment. It is 1 hour. The coach is right there with you. They're guiding you through. They're watching every rep, hopefully, or most of your reps, and can, correct you on the spot. Versus nutrition, that has a lot more variables. You're out on your own, you're at home, you're with your family, you're with your friends.
A lot of bright, shiny objects everywhere.
You're in social engagements. There is a lot more variables at play there. So it becomes, and it is a larger commitment. Somebody committing to the nutrition side of things. And I think that's why, generally speaking, you see more personal training clients than you see nutrition clients in terms of total volume.
100%.
Because that nutrition commitment is a greater commitment that affects many more areas of your life, versus your personal training could be very siloed. That I come into the gym for a total of 2 to 3 hours per week. That is all I am doing for that 1 hour. I don't have my kids here. I don't have my work here. I don't have my friends here. I'm focused for that 1 hour. Versus there is, a lot more going on the nutrition side.
Yeah, I think, you just walking through the journey of your running, journey. And one of the reasons I wanted to sit down with you and talk about it is just to hear about it. Cause I get a lot of this information in passing, like, hey, how was the race last week? And I did really good. I took third in my age group, whatever else. I'm like, damn, that's awesome.
Instagram posts. Yeah.
There's an Instagram post or whatever else, but we're both running our own directions, helping other people and running our own businesses in here and
going on.
All that stuff. So I wanted to get some insight on that and then share that conversation with people, because I think there's, again, a lot of parallels and a lot of things that people are involved in sport that they can pull away from it. But then also to give people a better understanding of you from like maybe the nutrition coaching perspective, because what they hear you talking about on the show so often is, again, this nutrition and all those aspects. And it is very broad. There are so many things. And people have this, I think people they're not quite sure what nutrition coaching is or what it looks like.
They think it's somebody handing them a diet plan that tells them what to eat every meal of the day.
Yeah. And I think
oftentimes.
Exactly. Well, in a lot of cases, oftentimes, yes. I think oftentimes you're absolutely right, because that seems logically like what they think.
This person tells me what to eat, like the personal trainer tells me what exercises to do.
But the reality of it is the nutrition coaching is way more like an ultra, right? It's a long process of building a base, learning some lessons, making some mistakes, running into issues like headlamps going out and running too fast at times. And
you can bet your ass that my headlamp, I check it 4 times now.
But you have to go through that, right?
Because I experienced what it's like to be in the dark.
Yeah, so I think, again, just to give people a better understanding of like what would nutrition coaching be like if I got into it. And I think a lot of nutrition coaches, this goes back to another podcast we had recorded earlier today, just, a lot of the people that do this, for a living and are professionals would not disagree with that statement that it's harder than personal training in a lot of ways. In human performance, just in general, is a very broad topic. And we have to talk about nutrition if we're talking about performing at the top level. And so, but the piece that gets, I think, the most misunderstood, and for a lot of reasons, because I think there's so many things going on, which we've already said, and so many, much less, there's a lot less people that actually go through it and go through a good experience, because getting a template on that's not nutrition coaching.
No.
So I just want to be clear about that. Like, that's not coaching anybody, right? That is
providing some instructions.
Some instruction.
A vague, broad, and arbitrary instructions.
Right. It's just like, somebody said, somebody that's been running a 5Ks wants to run a ultra, right, next week. Like, that's not like giving you instructions on how to get you or how to run an ultra doesn't help that person, right? Doesn't get them to the finish line.
There's way too many variables there.
As a matter of fact, you're setting them up for failure by doing that. So going back to what nutrition coaching should and look, maybe, and feel like, it sounds a lot like the journey that Stephen just took you on with regard to what it's like getting through a race. And I just want to be clear about this. The reason I'm saying that is because I think it's tough to make that connection in a lot of the topics that we talk about. So when I pitch nutrition coaching, or you as a nutrition coach to people, they're like, what is that really like? I mean, I heard this guy talking about all this stuff. I kind of hear it. So if I just listen to that, I'm going to get it. And, I'll be good.
I'm getting the information already. Yeah.
It's not the case. It's not how it works. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. And I think that going back to your, the seasons of an ultra, that could be very similar to the seasons of we'll call it your weight loss journey, where you're making progress, you're flying high. I got this. I'm kicking ass. I'm doing so well. And then you hit the plateau. And then all of a sudden you're stuck and it's a slog. It's not fun anymore. I'm not progressing as fast as I was. I see people passing me. That must mean I'm not going fast enough. I'm slowing down. And then we start to panic. And then we overcorrect to some type of shortcut, which, could be over-exercising, under-eating. There could be a lot of parallels there in that there is that's why it's such a mindfulness practice, and like bringing it back to, you said, that awareness thing. And that goes back to setting the expectations ahead of time. I think that, to bring it all back around, I think that is probably the most important mindset shift when you're going into an ultra, is I am going to be here all day. And just before you even begin, like I am strapping in for all day.
Buckle up.
I am committed to all day. Who knows exactly what's going to happen, but that could be a similar mindset if you're on some type of, weight loss, body transformation journey. I am locking in for a year. This process is going to take a year, and I'm prepared for it to take a year, just like I'm prepared for this ultra to take 6 to 10 hours, however long it is.
So maybe that resonates with folks out there that are listening, that have heard Stephen talk before, or heard Stephen and I just discuss a lot of different things, just in the two of us or with the team. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with Stephen if you want to, right?
Only if you want to.
If you want to have the conversation, if you want to talk about you and your journey and what that means or what that might look like for you, and you want to get to maybe know Stephen a little bit better, there's lots of ways to do that. You can reach out and call us. You can easily just go to our website, the Red Dot Fitness Train Online website, Red Dot Fitness, or it's rdftrainonline.com. There's a contact page there where you can reach out to us there, a simple email, or you can go to the nutrition coaching page, which, like all websites, those are usually easily navigable. You go to that, you can actually schedule a free consult with Stephen if you want to get in touch with him and just have a little discussion. This has got to start there. But I think what I'm also putting out there is that there's nothing sexy about nutrition coaching, just like there's not a lot of sexy or flash in an ultra. Yeah. Like, it is ugly at times. It's fun and it's beautiful at times, right? When you're out there, you mentioned like the Marin headlands. For those people that live in the Bay Area and they've been out there, like it is something, right? And it's
sight to behold.
No other place in the world looks like that, right? It's pretty unique. And you can have that journey and you can have that experience, but it isn't this flashy, like, hey, we have this template that we give you and we walk you through, and there's a formula for success. And Stephen's been extraordinarily successful with that. But it's also understanding the person on the other end. So reach out to us. It's easy to get in touch with Stephen. Put together a time, make a commitment to that time, and at least have the chat. So again, rdftrainonline.com.